Hi everyone, I'm Scott Sanchez, Head of Product Marketing for Containers and Serverless at AWS. And thank you for joining today to learn about your compute choices in cloud-native applications. Containers and serverless are at the heart of how our customers are developing their cloud-native applications, but there are some considerations to think about along the way. I look forward today to sharing some thoughts, experiences, examples, and hopefully inspire you to take these learnings with you as you think about building your own modern applications. So a quick agenda, and let's talk about why customers are moving to AWS, what choices you have when you're looking at cloud-native applications and the modern application stack. We'll go deep on Lambda and our container services, and then we'll bring it all home with some customer examples and information on how you can get started. The first question we really like to ask our customers when they start down this path is, how much infrastructure do you want or need to manage? Does managing that infrastructure actually improve your business? Do you have the expertise? And really, is that effort worth it? And so for most companies, the amount that they spend on managing the infrastructure is about 80%. And they only get to spend about 20% of their IT budgets innovating. And the fastest way to flip that ratio is really to get rid of what we at AWS call that undifferentiated heavy lifting. Managing the infrastructure, the servers, all the elements that go along with that. And many teams really underestimate the work involved, and they overestimate the value involved in running that infrastructure. And so we've spent a lot of time helping to remove that undifferentiated heavy lifting from our customers so that you can spend more time innovating. And containers and serverless really are great examples of how customers are adopting that. And so we've talked about how managing infrastructure is probably one of your biggest IT costs today, and how that expense is eating up the budget that your teams could be using to innovate. And so what do we mean when we say manage less? Well, from the earliest days of AWS, our goal has really been to try and take away that burden of managing the infrastructure. The servers, the storage, the networking, security, operating systems, it's all very time consuming, it's expensive, and keeping up with that pace of technology innovation and keeping your teams trained is a job all in itself. So as the infrastructure has evolved, AWS has continued to find new ways to help our customers manage less and innovate more. And things like Lambda and our container services that we're going to talk about today are great examples of that technology. So the drivers for customers moving to AWS, it's not just about that cost of hardware or software, staffing, training. There really are many opportunities that bring customers to AWS. And absolutely, that cost reduction and the scale and the reach that we can provide are huge drivers. But it's also about agility and productivity, the ability to automate everything, and gives you the ability to quickly reach customers anywhere on the planet. And at the end of the day, digital transformation is about automation and customer experience and increased reach to your customers, and being able to stay ahead of your competitors. AWS has helped thousands of the world's largest and smallest customers do just this, and so many of them are doing it with containers and serverless technology that we're talking about today. So once you've made that smart choice that AWS is where you want to build and run these modern applications, the first choice you often need to make in that journey is around compute. So let's start there. At AWS, when we think about compute, we often talk about it in three different buckets. The first bucket is instance-based compute. This is the traditional EC2 way of thinking. It evolved from virtual machines and sort of the way IT has historically been done. And it gives our customers access to manage and customize those environments at a very deep level. And AWS continues to innovate around instances, both in operating systems, hardware, CPUs, and all of the things that our customers ask for to help make their instance-based compute faster, more efficient, more cost-effective. The second bucket is containers. And containers are both a construct, they're a packaging method for applications, but they're also how the applications are being run. And we'll talk about that in our container services. But containers have become this critical way that customers are packaging and building and deploying their applications. They're smaller, they're more portable, they're easier to manage than full-blown virtual machine-sized applications. And the third bucket is Lambda. And this is a serverless model. We'll get into what that means in a bit. But it's a model where you essentially bring your code, and then we handle all the rest of making that code run at scale, securely, reliably, etc. And really important, this is not an or. This is an and. Customers continue building and deploying on instances. They also use containers. They also use Lambda. And increasingly, as customers tell us they want to manage less, as they add new applications or as they add functionality to those applications, they're doing it with containers. They're doing it with Lambda to complement some of their existing investments. And so today we're going to talk about those options. We're going to talk about how you can manage less. And we're going to talk about how customers are blending these things together to solve their business problems and innovate more. So when we compare these things, it's important to think about first how they're the same. And so we want to break down the similarities between them. And the reason there's so many similarities is because at the end of the day, our goal is to help remove that undifferentiated heavy lifting. And to do that, there's certain elements that you're going to continue to see from us. So we abstract away the complexity, we fully manage it. There's a great ecosystem of partners that are built into these services. They both support wide ranges of use cases and workloads. And there's deep integration with the entirety of AWS, everything from our infrastructure, security management tools, and of course our partner ecosystem. So lots of similarities, but there's also plenty of differences. So let's look at the other side. The biggest thing that we need to think about is that Lambda is event-oriented. And what we mean by that is that it sits idle, waiting, ready by your side until an event is triggered and the system jumps to action. And once that's triggered, then it runs your code, it deploys the resources transparently to you, runs your code at millisecond speed and millisecond billing, and you pay for only what you use. On the other hand, ECS and EKS, which are our container services that we'll dive into here in a bit, they are more oriented around orchestrating the compute resources to run your containers or to manage the clusters that run those containers. And so it's a very different model. One is actually running the code in response to an event, which is Lambda, and one is managing the resources to run your containers and managing how those containers are orchestrated and run across your application portfolio. So that's the biggest difference, and that trickles down to how they're priced and how they're measured and how you interact with them as well. And we'll get into that as we look at them individually. And again, can't stress this enough. So many customers run both. They use our container services, and they use Lambda, and they use instances. This is not a binary decision that you have to make. 80% of our container services customers have also adopted Lambda. This is a powerful number. Lambda is such an important part of how our customers and even our internal teams are building and deploying their modern applications. It is core to think about this event-oriented architecture and the ability to react to these triggers, the changing of a data source, a customer action, etc. Running that code and continuing on in your processes. And Lambda makes that so easy. That's why we see such a high percentage of our customers using both of these types of services. So, what are customers building? Well, it's everything. It's everything you could have done in a VM, or might have done in instances, or might have done in a monolithic application in the past. They're doing in containers, they're doing in serverless, and they're doing in both. Whether it's automation, data processing, even at the edge, web applications, machine learning, mobile, across all industries, across all geographies. These are very, very widely adopted. We have a tremendous number of case studies on our containers page, on our serverless page, and customer stories to go along with it. Lots and lots of adoption here across a wide variety of workloads. So we span the gamut of workloads for containers and serverless, but you probably still need to pick one, right? You need to figure out where to start. And we recommend customers start, again, coming back to that question of how much do you want to manage, we recommend you start by considering the thing that requires you to manage the least. At least consider it. And in almost all cases, when a customer tells me that they want to get to market fast, I recommend they start with Lambda because it is the highest level of abstraction for running your code. We like to say that Lambda is the compression algorithm for everything we've learned at AWS across the years on how to run code and run applications at scale. And it's all baked in to what you get when you use Lambda. So with Lambda, you only need to write the code for your business logic. You don't need to write all the configuration or think about all the servers and scaling and how that all comes together. And Lambda also has over 200 built-in data and event sources, all these triggers we talk about, which can save your teams a tremendous amount of time when you're trying to tie together different applications or different data sources. And so when you're trying to build an application, if all you have to focus on is writing your business logic, and you get to skip writing all that integration code, all the data code, all the triggers, all the event sources, all the configuration of how these things are going to be deployed and run and scale, that saves you so much time. And that's why customers continuously choose Lambda, and they get to market faster, and they do it at a low TCO. So Lambda has a tremendous number of clear benefits. Customers love it. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. Right? If your organization has standardized on a specific architecture, a specific container technology, or something like Kubernetes, you may need to give up some of those benefits that Lambda can provide in order to get the flexibility or to move further down the stack if you need to manage more. Right? It all comes down to that question: how much do you need, or how much do you want to manage? And so if you start by considering Lambda, take this idea of a serverless first approach that a lot of our customers are moving towards. And if you rule that out, fine, but at least you've considered it, and then we have additional options for you. And so we talk about Lambda being serverless, but what does serverless mean? It means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and we try and clear up any ambiguity around this when we say serverless. So to be very specific here, serverless to us means no infrastructure to provision or manage. You're not thinking about servers, you're not thinking about operating systems and patching and those types of things. It automatically scales by units of consumption and in a value-based model. So you're not thinking about it in server hours or those types of sort of traditional billing. You're thinking about it in terms of requests or events or responses, those types of value-based billing. And there's built-in availability and security and all the things that teams really do spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to figure out and get right and continuously optimize. It's all just baked in, right? And so that's how we remove a lot of that heavy lifting. That's how we reduce your overall TCO when you adopt these types of platforms. And so if we get a little more specific, we talked about how Lambda is event-driven a few minutes ago. And to understand that, you really need to understand what we mean when we say events. So in its simplest sort of technical terms, an event is a signal. It's some notification to Lambda in this case that something has changed. And in most modern systems, that's a JSON message. It's sort of a simple text-based message that comes in that says, hey, something changed, or here's some request. I need you to do something. Maybe what the state of the system is and what action needs to be taken. Very often that's an API call, or that's some type of notification like that. But it's also from those 200 plus data sources and event sources I mentioned built into Lambda. It's also things that happen across a wide range of AWS and third-party services and data sources. So something changed. Here's what I want you to do. Please give me a response. That's essentially the simplest way to think about an event. And I think about it very much like a light switch, right? Normal computing, you turn the light switch on, it runs all the time or most of the time, and you have to make a conscious choice to turn it off. Lambda, the light's always off. There's an automated sensor on the wall. And when you walk in, that's the event. It triggers the light to turn on. You get charged by the millisecond until you leave the room. The sensor notices it's finished, and it turns off the light. There's nothing to think about. There's nothing to worry about. You're only charged for while it's running. That's the Lambda model. Very different. Subtle, but fundamentally different. There's nothing to think about except I'm going to walk in the room and I'm going to walk out of the room. If 10 people walk in, or 100 people walk in, or 1,000 people walk in, you don't have to make different decisions. It's all taken care of. And that really is the difference with Lambda. You don't have to think about how you're going to scale it. You don't have to think about how it's going to handle. It's all built in. So let's take an example. Lego, everyone knows Legos. They, in 2017, had a very popular Black Friday, and their website was built with a traditional sort of monolithic application that didn't perform how they wanted, and they had some issues. So they came to us, and we helped them understand what serverless means and how they can benefit from it, and how they can adopt this loosely coupled event-driven architecture built around Lambda and these serverless technologies. And what they ended up building, it looks a lot like what you see on the screen here, which is that they used EventBridge, which is one of our serverless sort of core services, and they built this set of functionality with Lambda, with these events, so that, for example, when a customer logs in, that triggers an event. When a customer puts something in their cart, or tries to check out, or requests shipping, or processes the order, those are all different Lambda functions and all different events that go in and out of the system. And so they were able to have different teams work on these things separately, innovate in parallel, test them, deploy them, ship them, and put them in Lambda and scale them. And since then, they've had an incredibly powerful Black Friday without the historical issues that they had, and they've been able to move faster at a lower TCO as a result of adopting this model. But it's not just building smarter platforms for Black Friday. Lambda is how customers are innovating faster and getting to market faster. And a recent example of this is Coca-Cola. When COVID hit, they wanted to provide a touchless experience to their customers that were using their Freestyle machines. And you've probably seen these things. They're really cool. You can say, I want a Coke Zero with cherry, and fully customize your experience right on the screen. Well, in COVID, customers wanted to use their own smartphones. And so Coke used Lambda, and they used this event-driven architecture to build a system from idea to rolling it out to over 30,000 of these Freestyle machines around the world, so that customers could scan a QR code from their phone right on the machine, make their selections. That was an event that triggered back into Lambda that then notified the Freestyle machine to make that configuration. And they did that from idea to rolling it out in 100 days. For a company of that size with this global scale to deploy something at that speed and that scale and that cost of ownership, it is incredible. And that's the type of innovation that Lambda helps make possible. So it's worth noting that since last year, Lambda has support to run containers. So containers are a way to package up your code and package up your application. And you can put your functions inside of a container and give them to Lambda, and it will run it just as if you gave it code, right? So containers are this consistency that we've built into so many of our services, and you can absolutely run your containers inside of Lambda. But that's separate from ECS and EKS, which are our container services. Those are the services that help operations teams deploy and manage hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of containers. And let's dive into what we mean by container services. So we talked earlier about how containers really do represent the majority of all new applications that are being built and deployed today. And 2/3 of the industry's containers are running at AWS. And when we ask customers why they picked us for their containers, they tell us it's because we have the most choices. We give them the most flexibility. We make it easiest. And containers, again, are just the construct. They're the packaging method. You need a way to do something with them. AWS continues to innovate and make that as easy as possible to build your containers, deploy them, run them, scale them, secure them, manage them. And those are all the components. It's not just, I need an orchestrator for my containers. Yes, you do. But you also need all these other pieces that come together. And so you're going to see AWS continue to build support for containers into more and more of our services over time to make that easier for our customers. So many customers simply want to run containers, and others might have strong open source preferences that leads them to Kubernetes. And at AWS, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach. You can pick the container service that aligns most directly with your answer to that question of how much do you want or need to manage. And so let's look at that. So if you want to go all in on containers and manage as little as possible, right? You want to spend as much time on your code, much time on your applications and innovation, and as little time on the container infrastructure, then ECS is a great option. It's the most abstracted of our container solutions. It comes ready to run your containers at Amazon scale with an opinionated set of automations and configurations, but still giving you plenty of flexibility and integrations to support whatever you want to throw at this thing, wherever you want to run it. On the other hand, if you want that open source flexibility and to bring the entirety of that open source community of tools, EKS, our Kubernetes offering, gives you a secure, reliable, and always up-to-date way to manage your Kubernetes clusters in AWS regions or wherever they might be around the world. And finally, Fargate brings the benefits of that serverless operations model we talked through a couple minutes ago. It brings that to ECS and EKS. So Fargate is a compute choice where you have this choice of running it on traditional instances or on Fargate. And Fargate removes more of that undifferentiated heavy lifting for customers that don't want to manage the underlying instances and want AWS to manage how that compute layer is provided. And so the reality is that just like between container services and Lambda, we have a long list of customers who use both ECS and EKS. And some examples of that might be, one team that just wants to focus on, building and shipping applications that they might be building in the Docker ecosystem, and they plug that directly into ECS, and they ship it, and they run it, and everything's great. But another part of the organization might be building things on top of Kubernetes, and they want to use EKS. They're containers, they're portable, it's not a one-way door, and we make that easy for our customers to use both. So we talked about that portability of containers, and not just the ability to move between services, but the ability to move between locations, from your desktop where you might be developing, to your test environment, to your production environment on-prem, to the edge, to an AWS region, anywhere you want to be. And so Many customers continue to have good reasons to run things outside of AWS. Might be regulatory, might be data gravity, might be you're just too busy to think about moving it from one place to another right now. So we made it easy. We meet you where you are, physically and mentally, wherever you need to be. So with ECS Anywhere and EKS Anywhere, we give you the ability to run those workloads truly anywhere that you want to be. And finally, as we round out our thinking on container services, I want to talk about AppRunner, which is a new service that we launched a few months ago. It's now the easiest and fastest way to build, deploy, and run your modern applications like web apps and APIs on AWS. Doesn't require you to have previous containers or infrastructure experience, but it still gives you all the benefits of that innovation around containers. So you can think about AppRunner as providing that full end-to-end modern application stack as a managed service from AWS. You can start from a code repo, like plug in your GitHub, and AppRunner will take care of everything. It builds the code, puts it in a container transparently for you. So again, you don't have to be a container expert. Deploys it, scales it, manages it, everything for you. Or if you're already using containers and already packaging your application in containers, you can give your container to AppRunner, and it takes care of that deploy, scale, and management for you. So we've talked about how easy it is to use, but it's not a toy. It really is built for web scale. It uses Fargate that we talked about behind the scenes. It's built by the same teams as our big container services. And so what that means is that if you start with AppRunner, you don't need to worry that when your app gets popular or your business grows, that you're going to have to tear it apart and re-architect and redeploy using different services. AppRunner is built for that global scale. It's built for whatever you want to run in it. We've just made it as easy as possible. Again, removing that undifferentiated heavy lifting and helping you manage less and spend more time on your apps. So that's AppRunner. We're super excited about it, and we invite you to check it out. Couple more things. So another new service that I want to call out is AWS Proton. So we announced this back at reInvent. We just went generally available back in June. And why is Proton important? Well, getting that workflow between the operators and the developers has always been hard. There's been service catalogs, there's been provisioning models, there's been templates, there's been all kinds of things over the years to help make this easier. When you get to these smaller units of compute, like containers and serverless, it only gets a little more tricky for the operators because you have so many more of these things to manage. Instead of one virtual machine, you have 50 containers or 100 Lambda functions. And so what Proton aims to do is really to build that bridge between letting the central operations teams define those architectures, define those guardrails, and that consistency around what tooling, what security, what configurations are approved and allowed, but then rolling that out to the development teams so that they can plug that into their modern application development models, plug it into their CI/CD pipelines, plug it into their testing, plug it into all the methodologies that they want to use to build their applications. And it gives them that guardrails, but it also gives the operators the ability to keep track of it, to manage it, to update it when things need to be changed. So we're really excited about Proton. It's now generally available, and the customer feedback has been great. So when we look at the landscape across our modern application services, there's compute, there's infrastructure, there's a place to put your container images, there's all the networking and integration, there's things like Proton to help you manage it. This is what we mean by containers and serverless really are the future of how customers are building these modern applications. And AWS is making it as easy as possible for our customers to plug all these things together and take advantage of a complete solution. So I called this out a few times, but it's really important to make sure we stress this point. This isn't an or. This isn't containers or Lambda. This isn't ECS or EKS. This is an end. No customers have one single need, and we've made it easy for you to use multiple services to get the job done. And T-Mobile's really a great example. They built a serverless development platform, and they use Lambda for many of their customer-facing applications. But they also use Kubernetes and have some of these larger always-on applications that they run in this Kubernetes environment. And the results speak for themselves. They are able to move really fast and innovate. They have great NPS scores and continue to grow their customer base with a strategy of blending these things together that enabled them to use the right tools for the job and move fast. So, where are we? I hope you'll start today. This may seem like a big leap from where you are, but we've got a ton of resources, great partners to help you on this journey. Interested in AppRunner, you can check out apprunnerworkshop.com or ecsworkshop.com or eksworkshop.com. We have great Lambda training and getting started guides on our website, all available to you at no cost. You can reach out to your AWS teams to schedule an immersion day to really dive deep on Lambda or containers. And when you're ready, pick a small project, pick a function, pick a configuration, and get started that way. You can really move quickly to see results. And finally, when you know you want to go big, consider getting some help. We've seen that 84% of successful projects in this space involve a partner. And so one of our really strong recommendations is to urge you to look to the AWS partners and bring one on that can help you through understanding this, architecting it, implementing it, and being successful. So, you joined AWS Summit to learn, and I hope you have done just that in this session, but there's so much more. And with resources from our training and certification, you can learn more about containers and serverless. You can go deeper with 3-day courses, labs, white papers, and so much more. So visit aws.training, get more information there. And thank you. Thank you for taking the time to learn about modern applications in containers and serverless. And please, as always, take some time to fill out the survey. It really does help us. Thanks again.